Hey everyone, it's Eric Huey, host of the Gen Y Leaders Podcast, where we prepare millennials to be leaders of the future. Now, if you're familiar with the podcast, you know that it's usually interview-based, and we tell the success stories of high-performing millennials. Each time, I tend to ask a couple of the same questions. Not all the same questions, because that would be a boring podcast, but there are a key 1 to 2 questions that I ask every guest on the show. And one of those is, what books or resources have made a positive impact in your life or in your business? Books are such incredible resources because they take years upon years of people's successes and failures and condense them into a few hours of reading. The mission of the book breakdown is to take those few hours of reading and then further condense them into 15 minutes or less of listening. This is the Gen Y Leader Podcast Book Breakdown.
Hey everyone, my name is John Shanahan, and this is a summary of Pitch Anything by Klaff for the Gen Y Leaders Podcast. I'm the co-founder of Strix and The Cavalier, both focused on helping men look and feel their best. I've been a YouTuber for the past 6 years, and I recently joined the Gen Y podcast in episode 70, if you'd like to check that out. Happy to be doing a book summary. I listen to a ton of audiobooks, not typically read them, but I find them to be valuable encapsulations of ideas that you can usually find out there on the internet. But then this really brings it all together in a nice format. And so I chose to review this book in particular because I found it immensely helpful in my development as a salesperson. But the principles that are covered in this book are important in all aspects of your career and life, because ultimately all sales is storytelling, and many parts of life are sales. It does not have to be external selling, like pitching somebody, or the way that it's really portrayed in this book. But one of my mentors had once said that you need to sell internally as much as external if you want to push yourself and your company forward. And so this, if you're a founder, you're always selling, and no matter where you sit in the org chart, if you want to make a change, you need to sell. And Pitch Anything really breaks down a framework for all of it, because there's a few key principles we'll talk about that can be applied to any sort of communication or interaction that you have with anybody, really. So this was my third time listening to Pitch Anything. I was preparing for literally one of the biggest pitches of my life, so I was excited to really have this new frame to revisit the book and also distill the learnings down for the podcast summary. Now, there's endless books on sales and sales process. Trust me, I've read a lot of them too, but this one really stands out in the realm of those books. It's both enjoyable, but it also has actionable changes that you can make to your pitches that, the book really highlights the fact that it's based on the science of human brain chemistry. And just anecdotally, the frame control techniques that are covered in the book are 100% worth mastering. I think the way that they're portrayed and discussed in the book may be a little bit of an extreme case of how, they're utilized, but they're 100%, accurate to the way that, pitch meetings, sales meetings, and interactions go. And to understand the frame control concepts of this book is a very powerful thing. So, what's also crazy about this book, and I really only realized this, going through it a third time, is it's almost a closed loop, like a dream within a dream, Inception type scenario. Because while teaching you the techniques of his pitch method, the book itself follows a formula to a T for setting up the highs and lows of a pitch, the big idea. It was actually kind of cool to see that play out on multiple planes while going through this book. I really only caught on to it a little bit in the second time, but the third time it was very noticeable. So Oren is a great storyteller. He has a ton of experience, and so it is worth a full read, but I do want to break down some of the key takeaways so that you can instantly pick up on some of these, and then definitely check out the book in full, in physical form or in Audible, which is the way that I experienced it. So we'll go through the 5 things that are really the takeaways from here, and Just a few things to keep in mind as you are setting up any pitch. But the framework for the whole book is the STRONG framework. So the STRONG framework breaks down into S, which is set the frame, T, tell the story, R, reveal the intrigue, O, offer the price, 5, nail the hook, 6, get the deal. And we'll break down each of those a little bit. The 3 of those, I think, are the really ones to really focus on, and there's a lot of learnings in the book. But the other thing, the first thing we talk about setting the frame is really about setting up the whole pitch. So positioning yourself and positioning what you are selling or what you are communicating and why it's important. And so the first one of those we'll break down is called the big idea. So this is really the difference between, how you set something up for a powerful introduction or how you just kind of meander into it, right? And one of the things that he talks about when you're doing your positioning or your introduction or your big idea is don't necessarily focus on yourself and your credentials. One of the examples he gives in the book is, you can talk about how you went to this college and you did this thing and you sold this, but really accomplished people will just say, I did a couple of years at McKinsey, I ran this project, now I'm here doing this thing, and belaboring yourself is not always the best, strong point. And I definitely saw that firsthand, where it's like you can really lean on your credentials, or you can really focus and hone in on the fact that you're here to do something important, to pitch this thing and to make a change in a business. And the big idea focus, there's a couple of ways to break down the big idea as well. So a big one of those is, why this idea, but then also why now. So focusing on the market forces that are at stake, the relevance to the buyer and why that's important to the timing, the unique market forces, basically the pattern recognition or the unique advantage that you have and why this is an important thing right now, and then why positioning yourself unique to the competition. And the big idea is something that you want to hone in. I guess the other way to think about this is kind of like your elevator pitch, right? So your big idea is something you can communicate crisply, effectively, and quickly when you're opening the pitch and communicate those important things, and then you'll unpack each of those as you go through. So now the other thing, and as part of that, so it's really about your positioning. So one of the things that he focuses in on when we talk about the way, the frames and the way that you pitch something versus the way that it's received, is you want to make this simple to be processed. And we'll talk about the crocodile brain in a minute here. That was like the number one takeaway that I had from this book. The first time I had, experienced it was the crocodile brain concept. And I've watched that now play out many times over. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. But really how to position yourself. So it's making something simple to be processed, making it not seem like a threat, which is something I'll also talk about in the croc brain. You want to make something emotional to make a memorable connection. And so that really comes back to the storytelling elements of sales. There's a lot of books out there that'll talk about, how to be a story salesman, how to really focus in on that sort of thing. When the positioning it's also about yourself too. So elevating your social status. And an important concept in here is to remove, usually it's an asynchronous process when you are pitching, because either you're pitching a bigger company or, you're a salesperson and there's a company executive on the other side that might be a higher position, or, that the buyer controls the power, that sort of thing. And it's really about elevating your social status in the moment to then position yourself as an expert, position yourself as the experienced, person in this scenario who can then, work with, this, position what you're selling. But then the other thing he talks about is pulling back. And this is something, it's probably the hardest concept in the book to really master and do in a authentic way, which is to pull back and say, but this might not be right for you. And I think it's an effective way to position yourself, but it's also one of the harder ones to really grasp, embrace, and master, which is to say, pulling back would be the equivalent of like, all right, look, I have all these great things, but, maybe you're not the right person for this, or, if this works out, then that's great. And there's there's a few things in there that are very nuanced, but can be, once you master it, that's a very effective way to do it, and it can come naturally as you practice it. But talking about your positioning, let's talk about the crocodile brain. So he talks about the neuroscience behind pitching, and I agree with a lot of it, which is I shouldn't say I agree with it, but he talks about the limits of human attention and the way that your brain processes information. So when you are pitching something to somebody, they are running it through their brain, and what you hope is that they are receiving it in the same way that you are presenting it, which is the way that you want it to be received. Ultimately, that's not how it is. Ultimately, the way that you handle any incoming information as an advanced Homo sapien species is through your midbrain and your crocodile brain. Your crocodile brain, and then your higher brain. So there's like 3 levels of the brain. Your crocodile brain, though, is the immediate place that all information goes to, and it is your instinct to say, is this a good or bad thing? Is your fight or flight response. And if you can pass the crocodile brain, which is like its evolution, then you can start to get to the midbrain, which is where more information is processed, and then to the higher brain where your neocortex starts to link all of those thoughts and ideas together and starts to get those. So I think it's a Benjamin Franklin quote where it's around give enough information to let the person sell themselves or something like that. One of my old mentors used to use that quote, and it's true. And so he talks about the crocodile brain in the way that you want to make sure what we just talked about, the past couple of things around positioning, the strong framework, and processing information. You want to make sure that you're presenting something that passes the crocodile brain and then also starts to get processed in a way that is effective, which then can help you get the sale. And the other aspect of the croc brain, midbrain, in the higher neocortex part is around frames and control. So these are so this even comes before the process of the information, and it comes just by the dynamics of you interacting with the other person that you are pitching, and the frames refer to both the power dynamics, but then also, like the time and emotional dynamics within a pitch. So frames and frame control, it's all about getting your point of view across, and your frames will collide. And so what I've observed, right, because this ends up being a vocabulary for how you sell, why you sell, and how to overcome objections and how to make sure your pitches are getting across. It comes down to the frame control. And so a couple of the frames that are reviewed in the book is the power frame, the analyst frame, the time frame, and the intrigue frame. Because ultimately, and when we talk about elevating your social status, if you go into a client, they have the power, and their frame will collide with your frame, which is the salesperson. And it's all about the dynamics of how you build relationships, how do you, break down those barriers. And if you go into an interaction and you try to if you have a dominant, client that you're trying to pitch to, and you come in as an equivalent dominant, I am smarter, this powerful, this XYZ, those frames collide, and more than likely the person, the client is going to win because they hold the power, they have the money. But if you go in with an intrigue frame, the intrigue frame could break down the power frame because you are presenting something new, you're presenting something intriguing, and you're revealing it and you're positioning it in the right way. Or there's the time frame. You have the power frame over on one side, and the time frame comes in. It's like, look, we can go over this, but there's also, this might not be the right fit, and we only have this much time to get this type of deal done. The frame stuff is, I would say, the most impactful stuff from the book to me, just because I've watched this play out. It's like if you depending on what you're selling, depending on what you're pitching and positioning, A lot of these things can sell themselves. It comes down to relationships, dynamics, and how you position yourself. And so the frames and frame control is how do you continue to talk and get your message across without having, I love the analyst frame because I definitely ran into this to myself where you're presenting an idea and the big brain guy over in the corner that has a PhD in XYZ is saying, oh, well, you do this. And then it's like, how do you handle that objection while continuing to get your message out? You got to answer it enough that you are satisfying the answer, but then you have to continue on in the pitch so that you can, get the message across. And so I would say, the things to come away from Pitch Anything is really about having the right flow to a pitch so that you can get your message across, but do it in a way that communicates your understanding, control of whatever you are pitching, the market, and starting to create intrigue around the product idea and the time. And then I just made a couple of notes just around like calls. I think a lot of us, present, pitch, and talk just through these things on a call. And when you're talking about calls, it's really about setting up the call to understand who is the MVP, right? If you have 2 or 3 people, who's the decision maker, but then also showing that you can be a trusted expert. I think one of the big shifts in sales, in the past decade at least, has been around this kind of more informed educational sale versus, the traditional techniques of like, make 100 phone calls, close 5 of them, that way, that sort of thing. And then just creating intrigue at the beginning and satisfying it later. And same thing with a call, you want to make sure you're avoiding low stakes. So, figure out today if we're going to move forward or not. It's like, don't just have a call to have a call. You want to have some sort of outcome to the call. You want to make sure you're conveying your expertise and the information, how familiar you are with a problem that somebody might be having and why you can solve it. And then, at the end, it's saying, look, you're the decision maker. Figure out the best way that we can work together. And, if I'm the right one, great. If not, let me know. I think the worst thing in sales, no's are part of the game, but the worst thing is this kind of like half yes, maybe not, yes or no, limbo that you end up going through and making sure that you can kind of head that off before then. And so Pitch Anything, if you're looking for a sales book, I would say this is one of the better ones. It's super, super digestible. Oren is a really good storyteller, clearly, by all the deals that he's done, and he throws in enough of these kind of like real-life stories or case studies that make it really fun and engaging. And so if you're looking for a pretty breezy read, this is like a 6-hour book on Audible, which is pretty short for some of the audiobooks, I would say highly recommend. And if you want to check anything out that I have done, you can go ahead and ping me on LinkedIn. Reference the podcast. Don't just say that you can increase my business 6 or 7 figures. If you want to see bad examples of how to pitch to me via LinkedIn, I could show you my LinkedIn inbox because I get 3 to 7 of them a day. So just reference either the podcast or something else there. And then my YouTube channel, The Cavalier. Strix, we can help you be handsome with great products for men to instantly fix your appearance. And I appreciate Gen Y having me on to do a rundown of Pitch Anything.